Consisted of 5 men, 7 women, 6 of whom were white, 4 were black, and 2 multiracial. And there was the moment, this is it, right here, you're gonna see when the judge announced the first count of the verdict.
Verdict, count 1. Court file number 27, CR 20-12646. We, the jury, in the above entitled matter as to count 1, unintentional second-degree murder while committing a felony, find the defendant guilty. This verdict agreed to this 20th day of April 2021 at 1:44 p.m. Signed, juror foreperson, juror number 19. Same caption, verdict count 2. We, the jury, in the above entitled matter as to count 2, third-degree murder, perpetrating an eminently dangerous act, find the defendant guilty. This verdict agreed to this 20th day of April 2021 at 1:45 p.m. Signed by jury foreperson, juror number 19. Same caption, verdict count 3. We, the jury, in the above entitled matter as to count 3, second-degree manslaughter, culpable negligence, creating an unreasonable risk, find the defendant guilty. This verdict agreed to this 20th day of April 2021 at 1:45 p.m.
And they came just over 3 weeks after opening statements began on March 29th. Now, the jury heard from more than 40 witnesses, but the most effective bit of evidence was the video itself of those 9 minutes and 29 seconds Floyd was pinned under Chauvin's knee. Now, prosecutors didn't have to prove Chauvin intended to kill Floyd. Instead, on the second-degree murder charge, he only had to intend to commit an underlying felony, here an assault, that caused Floyd's death. Now, third-degree murder he was also convicted of. It meant he killed Floyd with an eminently dangerous intentional act, that's the knee to Floyd's neck, with reckless disregard for Floyd's life and conscious indifference to the act's fatal effect on Floyd. And that second-degree manslaughter charge, also guilty, meant Chauvin negligently caused Floyd's death by consciously taking a risky action, again, the knee on the neck, that could kill Floyd. Now, the verdict came as Minneapolis and cities around the world and the country were bracing for the verdict's impact. Activist communities were fearing the worst, but hoping for the best after last summer's racial justice protests put police reform at the top of the country's political agenda, even as some demonstrations descended into riots and looting. But earlier today, President Biden weighed in, saying he thought the evidence against Chauvin was, quote, overwhelming, and relayed the Floyd family's call for peace and tranquility, no matter the verdict. Now that the verdict's out and Chauvin's been convicted of killing George Floyd, President Biden, as well as Minnesota State Attorney General Keith Ellison, will be speaking soon, likely to say that justice has been served for the Floyd family, even as more work may remain for the country. Now,
the crowds to stay calm. Obviously, this was a case that people were looking at all over the world. They've been calling for calm all over the world. It seems like people are just remembering George Floyd as he died, and now George Floyd, whose family and George Floyd got justice. So hopefully it will continue.
Right, we wait and watch, but certainly all indications it should hopefully be a calm night after that verdict. And the NYPD, of course, has been preparing for whatever happens. City in the wake of the verdict, and all of the things, the clashing with police that was going on in some of the demonstrations, saying that their family was not about any of that. They were asking for calm. So it's a very good point that you made. Now, going to what Stephen was just talking about, City Hall and the NYPD said they have been preparing for this and have a plan in place, had one in place, based upon lessons that were learned from last year, if the public felt that justice was not served. Now, this is video from last summer. George Floyd's death last May sparked weeks of protests, as you recall, throughout the streets of New York City. The bulk of the demonstration started out peaceful. However, there were instances where looting occurred, where destruction of property took place, and at times violent clashes with the NYPD officers who were there policing these protests and the events. But the department was criticized for a heavy-handed approach to its response. This was also cited in a scathing report by the city's Department of Investigation that highlighted numerous deficiencies in the department's response to those demonstrations. The response called for sweeping reforms, including better training by officers for such events, as well as the creation of a protest response unit to lead planning and strategy. And officials say that they have taken all the recommendations seriously and were prepared to put them in place.
Taking a look at some of the issues that we had to deal with in 2020 during the summer months, and some of the looting and the rioting, and we learned from it. But we also have other things that we learned from the DOI report regarding implementing community affairs for those that want to protest peacefully.
There's a video, but there's so much more than what meets the eye. And I think for anybody who's watching that video, I think it's really, really hard to have any doubts about what we saw. I think it's quite frankly possible in a
jury.
jury.
Yes. Obviously 12 jurors didn't have that many doubts either. They acted very quickly. We appreciate the time. We appreciate the insights in what is a historic day, I would say.
Yeah,
Thank you
just
so
really
much.
some pie, because we have lots more to come right now.
The top story tonight: the trial of Derek Chauvin, guilty on all charges.
Yeah, we are also following breaking news tonight on Long Island, where there was a deadly workplace shooting.
I was.
That was you.
Yes.
So he heard about it for the first time from your phone call.
Yes, and I heard about it from a woman named Ashley Canones, whose husband had been killed by the police. She Facebook, she tagged me on Facebook to say that MPD had choked someone and choked the life out of them. And I looked online, I didn't see anything, so I called the chief, and he said, no, someone died in custody as a result of a medical issue.
That's what the chief believed.
That's what the chief believed. That's what his officers had told him. And I said, did you see video of the incident?
He had not
said,
seen the
no.
video.
He said, I passed it along to the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension. I said, you need to see some video immediately.
Because in the beginning, there were no charges against Derek Chauvin, right?
Right.
None.
There were no charges initially, and so what happened after that, the chief saw the bystander video that we all watched, that Darnella Frazier captured.
Yes.
And then he met with African American city leaders at 7 a.m. the next morning at City Hall, along with the mayor, the FBI, and the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension. We demanded that all 4 officers be fired. The chief took a few hours to think about it, and then he held a press conference saying he would fire those officers. I was one of the people who spoke at the press conference. I applauded the chief and said, now we need charges against all 4 officers, and the black community leaders affirmed that statement, and then we began to apply pressure.
So what does it say to you, Nikema, about the power of videotape and the power of speaking up?
I think without Darnella Frazier's video,
Yes.
this wouldn't have happened. MPD would have been able to sweep the murder of George Floyd under the rug, because you can manipulate body camera footage in terms of how it's analyzed, but we know what we saw on that bystander video that made a huge difference. And in terms of the power of the people, we have to understand that we can change the world, even if it is a small group. There was a small group of us constantly applying the pressure. We pressured the governor to use his executive authority to remove the case from the Hennepin County attorney, who traditionally protects killer cops, and he put it into the hands of the Attorney General, Keith Ellison, who then was able to elevate the charges from 3rd-degree murder to 2nd-degree murder.
Because
and
that
to
wasn't even a
manslaughter.
charge in the beginning.
No.
Yeah.
The Hennepin County attorney tried to secretly agree to a 3rd-degree murder plea agreement with Derek Chauvin for him to serve 10 years in federal prison. But Attorney General William Barr said no, because he thought that the community would feel that the case was being swept under the rug.
What does this mean for black people in this state? Listen, even the governor and both the governor and the lieutenant governor have come out and said, I think, some pretty eye-opening statements about how people of color are treated in this state.
I'm glad that they're saying that. Now they need to do something about it. We have repeatedly gone to Governor Tim Walz to ask him to be a champion for police reform bills. We have 8 bills currently pending at the legislature, and there has been little to no movement on those bills. He has not shown any real leadership around transforming police, and we said the same energy you brought to COVID relief, you need to bring to police reform and ensuring a robust system of accountability, because black people are dying, Native people are dying, Hmong people are dying under your watch.
What can you say, Nikema, about the prosecution's case? You know, I thought they put on a very strong case from the very beginning. You know, research has shown that 80% of the jurors make up their mind after the opening arguments. I don't know if that's true. The closing arguments were also very strong. What can you tell us about the prosecutors in this case and what you think about the job that they did?
Well, one of the things that's interesting about this case is that once it was transferred from the Hennepin County Attorney to the Attorney General's office, he had the power to appoint special prosecutors. So that prosecution team that we witnessed, that stellar prosecution team, are some of the best attorneys from Minnesota and around the country. That wouldn't have happened if the case had stayed with the Hennepin County attorney. The attorney that gave the opening statement, Jerry Blackwell, is a well-known civil litigator who has his own firm. He used to be the president of our Black Bar Association, and he was phenomenal all throughout the trial.
His close was very strong as well.
Absolutely, and I felt that he took this case personally in terms of standing up for the dignity of George Floyd and for his humanity and communicating that to those 12 jurors.
Yeah, there was one line, he had several actually, but there was one line that stood out to me when he said, you know, at one point the defense tried to say that George Floyd died because of an enlarged heart. He said, no, George Floyd didn't die because of an enlarged heart. He died because
his heart was too small.
Because Derek Chauvin's heart is too small.
Yes.
Did that stand out to you? What is that? The subway? What is that?
Our Metro Transit train.
Yeah. Every time it goes by, I'm like, what is happening? But
yeah,
that happens all the time.
That runs through here.
Okay.
But I thought that Jerry Blackwell did an outstanding job of using catchphrases that would stick in the minds of the jury, as well as the global audience that had an opportunity to watch this trial. This was a rare opportunity to see a prosecution of a police officer, which we know they rarely happen anyway in the United States.
The other thing that I thought was made in the prosecution closing, where he said, this case is Minnesota against, it's not against Minnesota and the police department. He said, this case is against Minnesota and Derek Chauvin. We think that a police officer policing is a noble profession, and we are not trying to indict the police. That this isn't about bad policing. This is about good. This is not anti-police. This is very pro-police. Do you think that was a very important point to make, and do you agree with that?
I don't think it was a factual point.
You don't?
But I think it was strategic on his part.
What was not factual?
The fact that policing in Minnesota and across America was not on trial. It was very much so on trial. Derek Chauvin is not just a bad apple. He is a part of a rotten system, and he is the fruit that has been produced from that rotten system. If Derek Chauvin had been held accountable earlier in his career, when he accumulated over a dozen complaints against him and had been involved in other deadly force incidences,
none of which the jury heard, by the way.
Exactly. George Floyd might still be alive today. And so the system failed George Floyd and so many other victims. So they are very much responsible for what happened. Although, of course, they had members of the jury who had close ties to law enforcement. They had members of the jury who perhaps have not had negative experiences with law enforcement. And so they wanted to give those jurors an out to say, you can hold this one cop accountable and still trust in policing. Now, for many black people, we scoffed at that notion, but I understood strategically why they did it, and clearly it was effective.
It also seems to me that you still have more work to do, Ms. Nekema. Well, this is a celebratory day for you, but listen, I just met you 2 minutes ago, and I can already tell you're saying there is still more work to be done here. But right now, you're saying celebration is in order.
We have to celebrate.
The jury did the right thing, in your opinion.
They absolutely did the right thing, and I'm eternally grateful that they could see through the propaganda.
In your eyes.
Yes, I just began to weep as the verdict was being read. Tears of joy, tears of relief, and just really feeling like I could breathe.
Yeah.
I didn't sleep last night either.
I didn't, yes, I understand. Thank you, Nekema.
Thank you.
Nora?
He has been remanded to the custody of the Hennepin County Sheriff. He awaits sentencing. What steps do you think happen next?
The guidelines up to 40 years. On count 2, he could go to 25 years, and on count 3, he can go to 10 years. However, since this case involves one victim, Mr. Floyd, all of those sentences would run concurrently, which means if the judge gave Mr. Chauvin 40 years, that would be the sentence.
I thought I read somewhere also that because he has not been convicted of a prior felony, that some of that time might be reduced.
In Minnesota, the time is reduced by 1/3. That's it. So if you get, say, a 12-year sentence, you will serve 11 years. we have very determinate sentencing. There's no parole board. So you couldn't get a 40-year sentence and appear in front of a parole board in a few years and say, look, I've been doing all this, can you cut my time down? So if he gets 30 years, he will be out in 20 years. It's a very easy system to operate.
And Joe, while many people in Minneapolis celebrate the guilty verdict of Derek Chauvin, we should note there are still 3 more trials for the other officers involved, correct?
That's correct. And we should also note that this is the second time in literally just 2 years that a Minneapolis police officer has been convicted of a murder charge. The Hennepin County Attorney's Office convicted Mohammed Noor in April of 2019 of third-degree murder. And now the Attorney General's Office has convicted Mr. Chauvin of second-degree unintentional murder and third-degree murder. And you are correct. In just a few months, we will have another trial involving the other 3 officers. That will be a joint trial.
And we just heard Nakima Armstrong, who is the NAACP chapter there, the president there in Minneapolis, talking about that this is a systemic problem in policing there. What reforms have been made and which ones still need to be made?
Well, the reforms that have been made are very small. They've been at the legislature, and they've been basically on a use of force level. Basically, what the legislature has done is taken away certain affirmative defenses when an officer is trying to use force, such as with chokeholds. The reforms that would be coming after this would basically be about understanding people's backgrounds, race, how to approach people in the...
Something that we see on a day-to-day basis with these cases. The last time I seen people cheering like this, it was in Chicago. I was one of the organizers in the Laquan McDonald movement, and Jason Van Dyke was one of the first officer in Chicago. So
Laquan
we don't see
McDonald
it.
shot 16 times
16
on the
times.
streets of Chicago.
Yeah.
And it took about a year for the video of the shooting to come out.
Yep.
And that's when the unrest, if you will, began, and the calls for change began as well.
Yep, he's one of the first officers in Illinois to be held accountable. So to see this as one of the first officers in Minnesota, I'm happy, I'm shocked, but we need to continue holding officers accountable. But we need real legislative change in this country and really look at how we can move the needle, because this can't keep happening. This cannot be our reality each and every day. Bracing for videos and bracing for if a jury or judge is going to find an officer guilty.
I think a lot of people, when they hear the celebrations, when they hear some of the statements made about Derek Chauvin, they think that, or they jump to the conclusion that this is about community versus cops.
Right.
That's not what this is about if you talk to Jamal Green, because he has family members who are police officers. Right. We've talked in the past about how it's mostly about weeding the bad cops out of the system.
Yeah, and that's a hard thing to do. It has been so much that has happened over the years that this system is so corrupt that how do you even figure out where to start with that? We really got to step back and rethink public safety as a whole.
Jamal Green, thank you. Good to see you again.
Thank you. Good to see you.
Gail, back to you.
I would not call today's verdict day. I would not call today's verdict justice, however, because justice implies true restoration. But it is accountability, which is the first step towards justice. And now the cause of justice is in your hands. And when I say your hands, I mean the hands of the people of the United States. George Floyd mattered. He was loved by his family and his friends. His death shocked the conscience of our community, our country, the whole world. He was loved by his family and friends. But that isn't why he mattered. He mattered because he was a human being. And there is no way we can turn away from that reality. The people who stopped and raised their voices on May 25th, 2020, were a bouquet of humanity. A phrase I stole from my friend, Jerry Blackwell. A bouquet of humanity. Old, young, men and women, black and white, a man from the neighborhood just walking to get a drink, a child going to buy a snack with her cousin, an off-duty firefighter on her way to a community garden brave young women, teenagers, who press record on their cell phones. Why did they stop? They didn't know George Floyd. They didn't know he had a beautiful family. They didn't know he had been a great athlete. And they didn't know he was a proud father or that he had people in his life who loved him. They stopped and raised their voices, and they even challenged authority because they saw his humanity. They stopped and they raised their voices because they knew that what they were seeing was wrong. They didn't need to be medical professionals or experts in the use of force. They knew it was wrong, and they were right. These community members, this bouquet of humanity, did it again in this trial. They performed simple yet profound acts of courage. They told the truth, and they told the whole world the truth about what they saw. They were vindicated by the chief of police, by Minneapolis' longest-serving police officer, and by many other police officers who stepped up and testified as to what they saw and to what they knew. What happened on that street was wrong. We owe it, and we owe our gratitude to we owe them our gratitude for fulfilling their civic duty and for their courage in telling the truth. To countless people in Minnesota and across the United States who joined them in peacefully demanding justice for George Floyd, we say, all of us, thank you. In the coming days, more may seek to express themselves again through petition and demonstration. I urge everyone to honor the legacy of George Floyd by doing so calmly, legally, and peacefully. I urge everyone to continue the journey to transformation and justice. It's in your hands now. I also want to address the Floyd family, if I may. Over the last year, the family of George Floyd had to relive again and again the worst day of their lives when they lost their brother, their father, their friend. I'm profoundly grateful to them for giving us the time we needed to prosecute this case. They have shown the world what grace and class and courage really look like. Although a verdict alone cannot end their pain, I hope it's another step on the long path toward healing for them. There's no replacing your beloved Perry, or Floyd, as his friends called him, but he is the one who sparked a worldwide movement, and that's important. We owe our thanks to the men and women of the jury who gave many hours of their time and attention to carefully listening to the evidence, weighing the facts, rendering a verdict. They are regular people from all walks of life, a lot like that bouquet of humanity on that corner on May 25th and in that courtroom. They answered the call, and they served in a landmark trial. They now deserve to return to their lives. If they ask you to respect their privacy, we ask you to honor that request. I want to acknowledge the remarkable team that helped us prosecute the case. We put everything we had into this prosecution. We presented the best case that we could, and the jury heard us, and we're grateful for that. We had the sole burden of proof in the case, and history shows that winning cases like these can be difficult. I'm proud of every hour, every minute, and every ounce of effort we put in this case. And let me tell you, we spent many hours working on this case, did we not? We, week after week, committee meeting after committee meeting, this team never let up and it never quit. We fought every day, and we did it together. The Attorney General's office together with the Hennepin County Attorney's office. Thank you, sir. And we did it together. I'm deeply grateful to everyone who worked on the case. Most of these folks will tell you it's a bad idea to put together a team of all Michael Jordans. Nobody would want to pass the ball. This team, that was their true strength, is sharing the load, passing the ball, understanding that all of us together are smarter than any one of us alone. And that worked. Although the verdict has been rendered, this is not the end. In the coming weeks, the court will determine sentencing, and later this summer, we expect to present another case. We will not be talking about that. This verdict reminds us how hard it is to make enduring change. And I just want to finish by sharing some important historical legacy, if you allow me. In 1968, the Kerner Commission was formed to investigate the causes of uprisings across major American cities. And a man named Dr. Kenneth Clark, a famous African-American psychologist who, along with his equally accomplished psychologist wife, Mamie, contributed to compelling research in the Brown versus Board of Education case. And Dr. Clark testified at the Kerner Commission. And I want to quote you what he said. I read that report, the one in the 1919 riot in Chicago, and it was as if I were reading the report of investigating the committee of the Harlem riot in 1935, the report on investigating the Harlem riot in 1943, and the report of the McCone Commission on the Watts riot. I must say again in candor to you, the members of this commission, it's like a kind of an Alice in Wonderland with the same moving picture reshown over and over again, the same analysis, the same recommendation, and the same inaction. Those are the words of Dr. Clark in 1968. Here we are in 2021. Here we are in 2021, still addressing the same problem. Since Dr. Clark testified, we have seen Rodney King, Abner Louima, Oscar Grant, Eric Garner, Michael Brown, Freddie Gray, Sandra Bland, Philando Castillo, Laquan McDonald, Stephon Clark, Atiana Jefferson, Anton Black, Breonna Taylor, and now Dante Wright and Adam Toledo. This has to end. We need true justice. That's not one case. That is a social transformation that says that nobody's beneath the law and no one is above it. This verdict reminds us that we must make enduring systemic societal change. More than a month ago, months before George Floyd was murdered, the Minnesota Public Safety Commissioner John Harrington and I released the recommendations of our working group on reducing deadly force encounters with law enforcement. What all of us in that working group, including law enforcement, wanted is for everyone to go home safe. Anytime someone doesn't, everyone's lives are changed forever. We need to use this verdict as an inflection point. What if we just prevented the problem instead of having to try these cases? We don't want any more community members dying at the hands of law enforcement and their families' lives ruined. We don't want any more law enforcement members having to face criminal charges and their families' lives ruined. We don't want any more communities torn apart. One way to prevent this is to get into a new relationship where we as a society re-examine the use of force and our old settled assumptions. I'm so proud of Chief Arredondo and the Minneapolis police officers who by their testimony said enough is enough. And another way to prevent it is by acknowledging and lifting up everyone's humanity, helping communities heal, and officers be well. Another way to prevent it is with accountability. Passing laws and instituting policies and training is important, but they must be more than words on paper, and there must be accountability for violating them. With this verdict, we have brought some accountability. Finally, this verdict demands us to never give up the hope that we can make enduring change. Generations of people said slavery would never end. Generations said Jim Crow would never end. Generations said women would never be equal to men. Generations said if you were different in any way, you could never be a full and equal member of our society. Today, we have to end this travesty of recurring, enduring deaths at the hands of law enforcement. Those beliefs are things we have to focus our attention on. And as I now do close, I just want to say to you, the work of our generation is to put unaccountable law enforcement behind us. It's time to transform the relationship between community and the people who are sworn to protect them from one that is mistrustful, suspicious, and in some cases terrifying, into one that is empathetic, compassionate, and affirming. That will benefit everyone, including police officers who deserve to serve in a profession that is honored, in departments where they don't have to worry about colleagues who don't follow the rules. Now that work is in your hands. The work of our generation is to put an end to the vestiges of Jim Crow and the centuries of trauma, and finally put an end to racism. We can end it. It doesn't have to be with us into the future if we decide now to have true liberty and justice for all. The work of our generation is to say goodbye to old practices that don't serve us anymore, and to put them all behind us. One conviction, even one like this one can create a powerful new opening to shed old practices and reset relationships. So with that, I just want to say that I do hope that people step forward and understand that nobody can do everything, but everybody can do something. You can do something the way like everyday people like Donald Williams and Genevieve Hanson and Christopher Martin and Charles McMillan and all those teenagers and young people stepped up and did something. You can do things like help pass the George Floyd Justice and Accountability Act. It's in your hands. Let's get the work done. And now I'd like to invite my friend and partner in justice, Michael Freeman, Hennepin County Attorney.
Problems, but it certainly is holding Derek Chauvin accountable for murdering George Floyd, and hopefully it will cause other police officers to think twice before they engage in lethal force.
He talked about the 1968 Kerner Commission that Dr. Kenneth Clark contributed to, that we are still addressing the same problem back then in 1968. We are still dealing with those same problems of racial injustice in 2021 even.
And I think that I was inspired certainly by Keith Ellison's message that despite how long racism has lived in this country, despite how long police brutality has harmed people in this country, we still as a nation can bring about its end, and we should be focused on bringing about its end, because so many families, even during the Chauvin trial, I saw one report